What if I told you that some of the most famous stories in the world, they have these hidden messages, this secret structure that honestly most of us just miss? Well, today we're going to learn exactly how to find them.
I mean, you know that feeling, right? Where you're reading an ancient story, you see the words on the page, but you just know there's something else going on, a whole other layer of meaning just simmering right under the surface, a kind of logic that you can't quite put your finger on.
Well, our guide for this whole thing is a guy named Rashi. Seriously, think of him as the ultimate detective of the Bible. He's the one who finds clues in every single word to uncover this brilliant hidden structure inside these ancient stories. Okay, so our first case study, it's the legendary destruction of Sodom. Yeah, that famous story of fire and brimstone, but as we're about to see through Rashi's eyes, the little details, oh, they matter so much more than you can possibly imagine. So the biblical text itself is pretty straightforward, right? It says that as the sun comes up, God just obliterates Sodom and all the cities around it, wipes them clean off the face of the earth for their wickedness. A very clear act of divine judgment. But this is where Rashi does his thing. He zooms in on what seems like a totally minor detail, the timing. And he asks this brilliant question: why dawn? I mean, why not noon? Or the middle of the night? Why that specific moment? And his insight here is just, wow, it's incredible. See, dawn is that one time of day when you can see both the sun and the moon in the sky at the same time. And here's the absolute genius behind that timing. Rashi points out that Sodom was full of idol worshippers, right? Some of them worship the sun, others worship the moon. So, by striking at dawn, God makes sure that neither group could turn around and say, oh, well, my God was just off duty and couldn't save us. It's this incredibly precise justice that leaves absolutely no room for excuses. None. And this just shows you Rashi's method perfectly. Take Lot's wife. The Bible just says she looked back, and boom, pillar of salt. But Rashi's like, wait a minute, why salt? And he digs up this backstory from Jewish tradition where she'd actually refused to give salt, a basic act of hospitality, to her guests. Her sin was about salt, so her punishment became salt. It fits perfectly. And this uncovers a huge principle that Rashi finds over and over again. He calls it measure for measure. The idea is that punishments in the Bible, they're not random, not at all. Instead, every single consequence is like a perfect, almost poetic reflection of the original crime. And this idea, measure for measure, that's the key we're going to use for the rest of our stories. So let's stick with this measure for measure idea, because it flows right into the very next part of the story. After they escape Sodom, Lot and his two daughters are hiding out in a cave, and they are facing what they believe is a full-blown existential crisis. And their reasoning, it's honestly pretty chilling. I mean, they've just watched the entire world as they know it go up in smoke. Rashi explains their mindset here. They genuinely think they are the last three people alive on the planet. So in their minds, the entire survival of the human race, it's on them. Now, this is where Rashi's analysis gets super nuanced. He doesn't just look at the act, he looks at what happens after. Okay, so both daughters have sons with their father, but, and this is key, pay very close attention to the names they pick. The older sister is pretty shameless about it. She names her son Moab, which literally means from my father. The younger sister, though, she's a bit more discreet. She names her son Ben-ammi, which means son of my people. It seems like a small difference, right? But oh, the consequences are huge. And Rashi explains that because of that one small act of discretion, centuries down the line, God commands the Israelites to leave the descendants of the younger daughter completely alone. But the descendants of the shameless older daughter, they were fair game. It's measure for measure again, but this time playing out across generations of history. Incredible. All right, let's shift gears to our final story. And this is where that measure for measure principle leads to, I think, its most powerful conclusion. This one's all about Abraham. He moves to a new place and finds himself in a situation that is, well, dangerously familiar. So here we go again. Abraham, fearing for his life, tells everyone that his beautiful wife Sarah is actually his sister. And just like what happened back in Egypt, the local king hears about her and immediately takes her into his palace. But this time, something's different. Before the king, Abimelech, can even touch Sarah, God shows up in a dream and gives him this very stark warning. He says, I am the one who kept you from sinning against me. And at the exact same time, this bizarre plague hits the entire royal household. Rashi explains it as closing up all the secretory channels. Yikes.
So naturally, a terrified Abimelech confronts Abraham, like, what did you do? And Abraham lays out his defense in 3 parts. First, he says it was just pure fear. He thought they'd kill him for his wife. Second, he pulls out a technicality. Well, actually, she is my half-sister. And third, he reveals this was a pact they had made long ago, just to stay alive while they were wandering.
Okay, but the way this whole mess gets resolved, that's where we find what might be Rashi's most profound insight yet.
So, Abimelech gives Sarah back, throws in some gifts for good measure, and in return, Abraham prays for the king and his household. And just like that, the plague is lifted. They're all healed. Seems like a nice, simple ending, right? Well, the story isn't quite over. Because the story of Abimelech ends right there. And the very next verse in the Bible, with literally no break, no transition, says that God took note of Sarah, and she conceived and bore a son. Just like that. After decades and decades of waiting, the promise is finally fulfilled at this exact moment.
Now, for pretty much any other reader, those would seem like 2 totally separate events. But not for Rashi, no way. He connects the dots with this absolutely stunning teaching. Think about it. Abraham desperately needed a child, and Abimelech's household desperately needed the ability to have children restored to them. By praying for someone else who needed the exact same thing he did, Abraham unlocked his own blessing.
This is the ultimate measure for measure, isn't it? The very act of praying for someone else to be opened is what opened the path for his own miracle, the one he'd been waiting for his entire life. Rashi shows us that these aren't just 2 stories sitting next to each other in the text. No, one is the cause and the other is the effect.
It just leaves you wondering, doesn't it? With a guide like Rashi, we get to see the hidden mechanics, the secret engine running underneath these ancient narratives. And it really makes you ask, what other profound truths are just sitting there, right in plain sight, in all the stories you thought you knew, just waiting for someone to unlock them?